Welcome to the SafetyPro Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I want to give a huge shout out to our partners in safety. They make this podcast possible. So whenever you get an opportunity, go ahead and hit the links in the show notes. Go see what they have to offer for you. First up is Mighty Line Floor Tape. If you're interested in marking your facilities, maintaining your 5S program, ensuring the safety of your employees in your facilities, Mighty Line Tape has all the products that you need to make that happen. We're talking floor tape that is designed for forklift traffic, designed for foot traffic. We're talking custom signs with your own logos, by the way. Go to mightylinetape.com/podcast. See what they have to offer for you. By the way, when you get there, you can order a free sample of their incredible floor tape. That's mightylinetape.com/podcast. Let them know that we sent you. mightylinetape.com/podcast. Next up, of course, is the official safety services provider of the SafetyPro Podcast. I'm talking about none other than Aero Safety. Drew Hinton with Aero Safety has been a friend of the podcast for many years, and we are excited to partner with Aero Safety. If you're looking to have training done in your facility, assessments, audits, inspections, maybe it's program reviews and development, it doesn't matter. Whatever your safety needs are, Aero Safety has you covered. No canned programs that they dust off the shelf and repackage and resell. Every service they offer is customized to your business, your processes, the tasks your workers need to perform, and of course, it is to the highest safety standard. Go to aerosafetyus.com. Get a discount off your first quote when you mention you heard about them on the SafetyPro Podcast. Again, aerosafetyus.com. Let them know that we sent you. Now let's get into today's episode. Hey, welcome to the SafetyPro Podcast. We are joined once again by Alex Paradies from TapRooT. Alex, how you doing?
Oh, I'm always glad to be here, Blaine.
Yes, I like nerding out on this stuff. Like I said, the reason why we have workplace safety, if you want to go big picture, is because bad things happen to good people, or we could say bad things happen to good processes too sometimes. But we have to figure out how and why these things are happening, right? And the misfortune that we have in our profession, as safety professionals, is the added tragedy of an individual being injured. It isn't that a machine broke or something. It's more often than not, somebody suffered as a result as well. And so it's important that we get to the bottom, to the root causes and underlying causes. So this topic to me is like huge. It's been huge my entire career. So I think this is going to be an interesting one because we are going to talk about some frequently asked questions when it comes to the overall process of deep diving an incident, root cause analysis, whatever we want to call it. And I think it's important to talk about these FAQs because it also does something else for us safety pros. It helps us understand why would somebody want to ask some of these questions, and it kind of gives us an idea of what might be going on, some myths, misperceptions, misconceptions of the process, right?
Yeah. And I think, the ultimate goal with any of these activities, and most people don't ask you what's the ultimate goal of a root cause analysis, but I would say, the ultimate goal of these is to make sure it doesn't happen again to someone else or even to the same person, but it does make sure it doesn't happen again. And people, I think, misunderstand often with root cause analysis that it's not just about getting information. It's what we're doing to learn from that information and what do we do with that information. So I think it's really important to have conversations about why we do root cause analysis, and it's really important to have conversations about the methods that we use and that we should be thinking about as we do root cause analysis.
And I think you nailed it with that simple statement. I mean, it already happened. So why? I mean, you could make the argument of, oh, well, shoot, don't do that again, and then move on. But it already happened. So the purpose of learning how it transpired is so that it won't happen again. It isn't just for odd curiosity. Hey, I wonder why that happened. Let's go see. And then you just go, wow, that was crazy. And you move on. You actually have to put some things in place more often than not so that it won't happen again. So it's organizational learning at its base, right? And improvement. So let's ask some questions. You all, I know with TapRooT, I mean, I've seen a video on this that you all have done, and you and I've talked and have some common questions. Let's just start with a common question that comes to mind from you and your experience, and then we'll talk about that one.
I'll say a good one to start with is, what is a root cause? I think if we're going to start with the common question, I think that's probably the first question. What is a root cause, and what does that mean? So actually back in the 80s, there was not a common definition of root cause, which you'd think nowadays well, I mean, the term is synonymous with a lot of things these days, but there really was not a definition of what a root cause is. So we set out to drive and create a definition, and that definition has evolved immensely over the last few decades that we've been doing this. Our current definition is a root cause is a missing best practice or piece of knowledge that would have prevented the incident or reduced the likelihood or consequences of that incident. So we're looking for missing best practices or pieces of knowledge that we can apply to our system to prevent recurrence. And that's why I think I tie that back to what I said earlier of what is root cause analysis. It's the process of looking for these missing best practices and pieces of knowledge that we can apply in our system. And so I think when people get into root cause, sometimes people mistake that there's just one, right? Oh, there must be one single root cause of this. And we're looking for the root. But if you think about a tree, does it have a single root? No, it's got a network. There's multiple ways, there's multiple best practices that we can apply to prevent a problem or reduce the likelihood of it happening again. And so when we think about root cause analysis, it's the journey of searching for those missing best practices that we can apply in our organization to prevent injuries, mistakes, errors.
And I love that you started with the definition, because if we're going to analyze for root causes, we have to know what a root cause is. And some people might say, oh, you're just splitting hairs. No, if I told you, just go and find some way this could have happened, you will find some way it could have happened. But if I tell you, you want to seek out missing best practices or failure to apply knowledge of our industry or business that could have prevented or made it less likely or reduced the severity or impact. Okay, now you're looking for something specific versus just go find anything that could have caused this. Well, more often than not, I'm going to start with, well, who was injured, right?
Who caused this? That's right. Who caused this?
Yes. So I love that you start with the definition, and I do think many companies, and you're with your decades of experience in this, from the TapRooT experience with this, let me know what you think. Many companies just don't have that. They don't have a formal, put it in a policy. This is what we're looking for. Define a root cause. root causes. Because you're right, single theory cause of accidents is a bias we assume, and then of course that jumps us right to the 5 why that everyone loves to use for everything. You talk about a hammer in search of a nail, but I do think that that's a great place to start. Well, if we're analyzing this thing, what is it? What is it we're supposed to be analyzing? So how have you seen this? You said it's evolved over the last few decades. How have you seen this change the impact or results of analysis that companies have conducted over the years? Have you seen an impact of just the definition changing?
Yeah. So, it's always funny when you find the definition showing up in other places. I was watching a webinar done by a software company, and they run like an EHS software, and they were talking about their root cause module, and up pops our definition of it. And I'm like, hey, look at that. They were wrong entirely about how to do things, but they had the right definition. So yeah. I'll say this, what I've seen, if you look at our definition, how it's shifted and how the philosophy of root cause analysis has shifted over that 30-year period. Early on, and I don't remember our original definition off the top of my head perfectly, but essentially it was like the lowest level cause that management has control to fix.
Control.
It was all about control of a system. And a lot of root cause methods and a lot of philosophy early in the 90s and late 80s was all about, well, this is what we can control. You get to something that you can control. Because if you do 5 whys, and I'll say if you do it incorrectly, but honestly, if you just do it, this is what happens. You either have 2 mistakes that happen a lot. One is people stop too early. They find someone made a mistake and they stop asking that why question. Or they keep going until they get to something that either they don't have control over, or there's something that is an immutable law of physics, for example. And they're like, well, I found this. Time can't be changed. So there we go. And you're like, I think you're missing the purpose of this. This isn't just asking the whys. This is about understanding the context behind things and gathering the right information to help us understand that and get to what we can do. So there's actionable things that we need to look at. So that's kind of how our definition has evolved, is trying to help people understand it's not we're looking for the thing to pin it on, but we're looking for what we can do to prevent those mistakes, prevent those errors, and prevent our system from breaking down.
Yeah, and I mentioned single theory cause of accidents. There's also another bias that I have. I did a whole top 10, and there's many, by the way. There aren't just 10, and it's crazy. And I often joke, assuming or thinking you don't have a bias is a bias. but one of them is linear thinking, right? This, like, we need a systems, a holistic view, a systems view, linear thinking. And when I've done some trainings in the past, this is many years ago. Do you remember the DirecTV commercials? We may have talked about this on another episode.
Yeah, I remember those commercials. I don't think we have.
Okay. I've played those in a training session to illustrate the pitfalls of linear thinking and why we need a systems view. And one was don't end up in a roadside ditch cable, get rid of cable. And the whole premise was, when you have cable, they get your bill wrong. And when they get your bill wrong, you sit on hold with customer service. It's all about how cable is crappy, And then when you get frustrated, you join a gym to take out your frustrations. And this guy's playing racquetball. And when you join the gym to get out your frustrations, you get hit in the eye with a racquetball, and he's got this eye. And then you wear an eye patch. And then people on the bus think you're tough and want to fight you, and then you end up this guy gets beat up and he's thrown in a roadside ditch, and it was, don't end up in a roadside ditch, get rid of cable. And so I use it as a way of like, okay, that's linear thinking. If I just got rid of cable, I would, well, I said, I asked the class, like, let's just play this silly thing out for demonstration purposes. What would a holistic view be? It was like, well, if it isn't cable, there's something, life is going to make you frustrated. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff can make you frustrated. It isn't cable. Like this person gets frustrated easily. Not wearing safety glasses, playing racquetball. There was no controls for that. Like there were so many things. Getting rid of cable is not the answer, right? It was like, you could still have cable and it still could be crappy, but there were so many things that could play. But it was a great illustration, and they did a whole bunch of commercials just like this. Don't attend your own funeral. And as a guy had to fake his own death because he looked out the window and saw like a mob hit, and then they were after him. But he was looking out the window because he was up late because there was a problem with cable, and he was waiting for the cable person. And it was linear thinking. Anyway,
I think of the kids book because I got small kids. I think of the kids book. If you give a mouse a cookie,
give a mouse a cookie.
Yeah.
Give a mouse a muffin is another one too.
Yep. There's if you give a pig a pancake, and there's a dog a something. I don't remember that one, but we have like
it's always going to lead to something else, right?
It always does. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so we have the definition of a root cause. We've seen how it's helped organizations, or talked a little bit about how it's helped organizations evolve in terms of shifting their focus on that, like that one thing that we can control to organizational learning, right? What's another common question that we hear about root cause analysis?
So I would say for us, a common question that we get is, why does it take so long? Or why should it take so long? Those are kind of common questions. Why can't it be fast? There's always these questions about speed. And to me, there's two things you have to think about. One, why are we asking that question? Are we asking the right question? Because oftentimes people want the fastest thing they can do, right? They want to be quick, they want to be fast. And the reason why is because their boss's expectations, they don't have a lot of time because they're busy with their other parts of their job. And I think oftentimes we don't support investigators to give them the time and resources necessary to do a thorough investigation. And so they feel this pressure to get things done quickly and not to get them done correctly. And so my thing is, why does it take so long? Well, it takes as long as it takes to do something thorough. So that could be quick. If it's a very simple incident, root cause could be really quick. If it's a really complex incident that has lots of mistakes, equipment that has to be sent out for analysis, or all of these little factors, you've got to take appropriate time. What you need to think about instead of how fast I'm doing this is, how well am I communicating where I'm at in my investigation? Because if you're doing work and you're making progress, leadership will generally think about how they can support you. Mm-hmm. What they don't want, and why you get a lot of this pressure, is because what happens so frequently is you have an incident that sits and they're not progressing on collecting the information they need to collect to get to root cause, to fix and close gaps. And so when you think about an incident, the way we teach it is it's about looking at, okay, I'm collecting information. These are the questions I have to answer. Communicate that to your leadership. This is where I'm having to go collect information. Go and collect it. Do your analysis. Say, hey, here's either what I have left to collect, or this is what we found. Now we're going to be working on fixing these problems and developing corrective actions. Cover through that, report that out. If you're reporting out where you're at in the process, as opposed to just, do you have all the answers yet? You'll get a better result. Because a lot of times, again, I've done a lot of 5 whys also in my day, and I would see people like report out, well, we know this, but we don't have a solution. And instead of reporting out, well, we've collected this, but we're still waiting on this evidence, I'm going to collect that today, tomorrow. We've got the interviews done, but we're still trying to get a couple smaller things answered and collect some data. Again, if you're reporting out where you're at in the process versus, no, I'm not done yet, you get a very different result from leadership.
That's a great point. I think you reminded me of the Lean Startup, that book way back. Great book. I mean, it's been around for a while now. But I think it's Eric Ries was the author, maybe. No, I have no affiliation, but he talks about like the typical, runway that we have. It's like we have this much budget and we have this much time. And then that becomes, instead, you say, well, I only need, instead of asking for, $1 million for this project that's going to take, 18 months, you say, well, we kind of know where we want to head, but we don't even know if it's going to work. So instead, why don't I just get $12K for this prototype and a very small scale test and get some results from that? And then we'll come back, we'll look at the results and make a decision on next steps and go, oh, it's positive results. Okay, so the next logical step would be, okay, we're going to expand maybe to this region, which means we only need this. So you do it like, because people can understand that incremental learning and progress instead of just looking at the whole thing and going, where are you? Why isn't it done? Right? You said you wanted 18 months and $1 million. Where are you? Well, we're still just building the prototype and trying to collect user feedback, and then we have acceptance testing and all that other crazy stuff. I like that.
It's the how do you eat the elephant, right? It's one bite at a time. So you got to take your bites. You got to work.
I had an operations manager. He was the VP of operations, and it was a company, and I was in California, and we used that phrase. They were trying to achieve the VPP partnership with OSHA, the VPP star status. And I said, look, how do you eat an elephant? And he goes, and somebody said one bite at a time. And he raised his hand. He goes, no, you got to shoot it first. And I was like, wow. Okay. First time I've ever heard that one. But you're right. Incremental. Okay. So how long should it take? It takes as long as it takes. I think it's driven by the size and scope of the event and what you learn along the way. You could open a can of worms, even for a simple incident, minor, I guess you would say. You could discover that it could have been a whole lot worse. And it impacts many processes and teams and things that you got to fix. And then there are some severe, like fracture, somebody was hospitalized, and it turns out, I don't want to say it was simple to fix, but I mean, it wasn't as, systemic or comprehensive. I mean, so you're right. You have to trust the process. If you have a good mechanism process, that will do the work. That will do it for you. But I think you're right. Trying to rush it, you're gonna get expected results from that, I think. So. Let's see.
What's the question you've heard?
I was just looking at my list here. So how do you, I've got a good one, because we talked about this a little bit. Why do we need precursor questions? And you were like, what's a
my first question was, what would you define as a precursor question?
So, and when I come to you or somebody and go, hey, Blaine got injured. They're getting cared for. Well, like, let's assume the initial response stuff is taken care of. And we're now at the point where we have to start our deep dive, our analysis process. So we need context, right? We need to know the who, what, when, where, what process was involved, what chemicals are. I mean, you need some basic, information to help identify possible cause categories that we then go and dig into. So that's what I'm calling precursor questions. These are, I don't know how you would call them. We got to jumpstart this thing somehow. I've had people ask me, like, why do we need precursor questions? Because we typically give some basic starter questions to get the ball rolling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's what, how, under what conditions, to what extent, and getting that context. I always think of them as context questions, because there's two things when I think of starting an investigation. One is understanding what happened, right? That's the goal at the beginning, is just to understand what happened. It's not to get to why, it's not to get to who, it's the what. So figuring out the what happened, building that timeline for what we do. And then it's to get the context behind it. It's the who, the where, the what, the how, the under what conditions, to what extent. It's not the why yet. Why comes in there, but when that initial phase is all about gathering information before you start driving. A lot of times people start with why, and that's a narrowing. It's a narrowing thing. And I think when you're starting an investigation, having some form of questions to broaden your scope, not narrow it, is what you want to do. We have some proprietary stuff that we teach, which is when we teach a thing called the tactical plan. And that tactical plan is for when you have a major incident. It's to give people a series of pieces of evidence they need to collect. Target, these are the things you need to go collect first. It's to give them things to look at, like a human factors perspective of what kind of questions you need to be asking from a human factors perspective to get information. And it's to help people broaden what they're looking at and not narrow it. Again, people want to quickly get down to, oh, this happened. Aha, well, I know what causes that. It's this, this, and this. So you must have done this. And you talked about bias. It's one of the experienced investigator traps, is actually to take what you know and immediately go look for that, because that's your bias saying, oh, I know what causes this. It's this problem here. And that narrows you down to, well, they must have made this one mistake, and there's my root cause. And so they narrow. And so I think the reason why you have to have precursor questions, these context driving questions, is to expand your scope and understand what happened first before you ever get to why. Yeah.
And I always tell folks the easiest way to remember it, because most of us understand these W's and an H, but the who, what, when, where, and who. And I always have to put a caveat on who. It isn't Blaine. It is worker, maybe contractor, but who is involved, a forklift operator, the who, what, when, where, why, and how is what we obviously want to understand. But before I can even answer the question of why, how could this have happened and why did it happen, I have to understand what I'm looking at. Where was it in the building? What materials were involved? What process? Like, you need context. So I love your answer of the contextual questions versus precursor questions. And I think I like that. Another way to explain it is, why did this happen is very pointed. It's very direct and limiting. It can be limiting. And asking these other contextual questions kind of expands the opportunity for additional information. So I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, and I think another tie with that too. When you ask the how, it's not how could this have happened, right? You don't want to do it that way. You want to ask how, as in, how did we expect this to happen? How does this normally happen? Mm-hmm. That's we look at the how from a what do we expect and what is considered normal or considered routine. And so how does this normally happen? How does this normally work? That's the kind of hows I generally try to take at the beginning.
Yeah. And you can do that. You can ask specific aspects or parts of an event. Like if a forklift struck a barrel, and you know how it struck a barrel, it ran into it. But was was the barrel is this normally where we store barrels? Is it normal to have forklift traffic there? And you can answer yes. Okay, well, under what conditions did this occur? You have to be very specific about it. I like that. What about who should be involved? I get this a lot. It's like, well, you're the safety manager, you're the safety professional, you do this. Or sometimes we say, no, I'm just going to support you. I'm the safety professional, so I'm going to coach you, but you're ultimately responsible for safety. Well, if you use that logic, we would call the CEO and have the CEO come out and do the deep dive, right? So I get this a lot. Who should be either running it or at a minimum responsible for making sure that it gets done effectively? And then that's one question. The other one is, then who should be like rolling their sleeves up, getting dirty, going through the actual process? Who should be involved?
So my answer to this is there's 3 roles that you need. Now, that may be one person, that may be 3 people, that may be 10 people. It depends on the incident, on how many actual number of people, but the 3 roles that you have to have in an investigation, you have to have a facilitator. This is someone who knows the process for root cause analysis. They are driving the process. They're not necessarily a process expert as far as what happened or the process of work, but they are the expert in our case, we say TapRooT, right? They've been through TapRooT training. They are the expert and know what to do. They're going to drive the process and facilitate it. The second thing you need is I call them a process expert, and this is a technical expert. So it's a process expert, technical process expert.
The work that was being done, like if there was an incident on assembly line 3 at this part of the assembly line, it's somebody who understands that process, that work.
So it's someone in safety, quality, engineering. It's somebody that has a technical understanding of why the thing is supposed to work the way it does. So it might be somebody that understands for a safety example, you might need a safety person in there that understands the process for how we get these chemicals and how they're supposed to be handled, and they have this background knowledge of that environmental side of it, right?
Got it.
Of why these things are the way they are and what those environmental standards and regulations say that we're supposed to do. So that's the technical knowledge. The other thing you need is practical process knowledge, which is you want an operator, a team leader, a supervisor that's done the work. It's somebody that knows what it's actually like to turn the wrench, drive the thing. They've got that hands-on experience knowledge of it. And so if you've got those 3 hats filled, you've got a person that can drive the process. They're making sure people are following and doing what they need to do to gather information, facilitate the process. You've got a process expert that can help you understand the technical aspects of it, the regulations, the knowledge base, this is the way the machine works. They've got that. And then you've got the hands-on knowledge of, when we have this problem, this is the workaround that we use, right? Those kind of things you get from hands-on knowledge. That's what we want to look for. So having those 3 hats filled, that could be one person, right? I know people that are investigators that used to be operators, that used to be supervisors, that used to be engineering, and now they have all that experience, and now they're really, they've got a really good breadth of experience. It's rarely it's just one, but it does sometimes. So I like to look for people that fill those roles. You might need multiple technical experts because you've got different systems that you need different expertise in. Same can be true from an operator standpoint. You may need multiple operators that have worked in different aspects of the job that occur that resulted in an injury, a fatality, something. So
good. Yeah, I like that. Those 3 roles. So don't think of like the maintenance manager. Think of like who's the best fit for these 3 types of roles that we need involved in every incident. Like,
Yeah.
got it.
And generally that probably is true for, I would say, more medium and high risk. When it's really low risk, you probably just have somebody filling out a piece of paper. So, based on risk, you probably can also spec how large your team needs to be. Right. I'll tell you who I don't recommend should be a facilitator, because I think the role of a facilitator is something you have to be mindful of. I don't recommend supervisors.
Yeah.
I have found in organizations that have their supervisors facilitate that they are focused on speed, right? Go back to that earlier question. How long does it take? Because they have all these other responsibilities that have to get done every day in order for people's paychecks to go out, in order for the product to make it to the customer. They have all these other responsibilities. And so root cause analysis always gets pushed down the list because there's always a fire to fight as a supervisor.
Yes.
And so, to me, supervisors can fill one of those roles, but it should not probably be the facilitator. You should probably have somebody on your site that has not more time, but more flexibility with their time that can be a facilitator. That would be a recommendation. Either have somebody that has that hat permanently, or look for roles that have some flexibility with their schedule that can allow them to facilitate the process.
Good point. Another question that I have had, and it comes from different places, I guess, that I've learned. And it kind of goes back to the H&OP. I know we call it HOP now, but I remember human and organizational performance has been around for a long time. I know I talked to folks that learned it back in the 70s when I was, in the mid 90s going through program. I heard about it in the fire service. That's how long it's been around. But this question of why can't we ask if somebody did something wrong? Why can't we ask if a person did something wrong? And I think we're taught now, for better or for worse, that it's like, no, you don't focus on the person, you focus on the process. I learned that. Focus on the process, not the person. What is the deal with some people that are like, people need to be held accountable? You've got that side of the fence, and then you got those that are like just curious, like, wait, how am I supposed to figure this out if I'm not supposed to imply, even indirectly, you did something wrong? So why can't I ask?
I actually don't agree with people that say you can't say someone made a mistake. I think that's wrong, because people do make mistakes, and that's to err is human. That's one of those HOP principles, right? Is people make mistakes. And so the way we think about it in TapRooT is, in understanding what happened, you're going to find places where your system broke down. And the easiest way to identify those is to look for where mistakes were made, right? Where did somebody make a mistake, make an error? Where was there an equipment failure? These kind of things that we look for, we call them causal factors. That's our term for it, is a causal factor. But causal factors are often a who did what wrong, right? Yeah. Who did what wrong, or who did not do something. So either they did something that would cause them error in the system, or they didn't do something that they were expected to do that allowed this safeguard to fail and allowed the incident to occur. And so, where people get scared about that is, and I believe this is a function of a lot of RCA methods, is when they find that someone made a mistake, they stop investigating.
Yes.
Aha, they made a mistake. That's the problem. Fix that person. And
our process is perfect if you would have just done or not done this thing we just saw or found.
And I remember falling into that trap early in my career when I had a bad employee. We've all had bad employees. This guy could not go a day without having a problem, making something, broke something, wrecked something, tore up, scrapped parts, whatever it was. He could not go a day without having this. And in our mind, when we were doing the investigations, they'd come up to, Oh, who was it? Oh, it was that operator. Oh, we knew it's always that operator. And so
we even have a name. We have a name for these people in safety. We have a name.
Oh, what's your name?
That are frequent flyers.
Frequent flyers.
We actually label. We know who they are, and I know if you're a safety pro and you're watching or listening to this, you know who you are. You've used this term. You've actually referred to specific people as frequent flyers. And so I want to hear what Alex has to say about this.
I had a much less HR safe term. I had a much less HR safe term I had for these guys. I won't say it on here, but
okay, we'll save that one for the B-roll.
I won't. It's not appropriate language, and HR would be mad at me. That's the way I think of that word. It's the kind of word that gets you taken to HR. But when you have those people, you get into this default mode of they're a screw up. Right.
Yes.
That's not their HR is okay calling them screw up, but they mess up, and you start thinking it's the person that's the problem. And so when you think and you're gathering information and you see that someone made a mistake, you can't stop at that. You've got to then dig in and say, what's the context behind what they were doing? Why were they making the decisions that they were making? And what led them to believe they were making the right decision? Because, everybody thinks they're doing things for the right reasons. It's rare that somebody is intentionally, trying to subvert something. We do have times when people are trying to sabotage. Yeah. That does happen, but honestly, it doesn't happen very often, at least in my experience. Most of the time, people are trying to do their job. And oftentimes I get, tying a question into this question, I get the question of the accountability. And, when you ask somebody, what do people get paid to do? Right? People will say, I want them to do the job correct, and we pay them to do the job right.
Yeah. That's
not true. You don't pay people to do the job right. You pay people to get the job done. The method for getting that job done, you have a suggested method, you have a preferred method, you have a safe method, but that doesn't, at the end of the day, what matters is the job got done, and that's what gets a person paid. If they don't actually perform the task, the job doesn't get done. If we don't get things into a truck and it doesn't go out the door, we don't get paid. So it's got to get in the truck. It's got to get out the door. If I encounter a problem during that, well, I have to overcome it. Now, we as safety professionals, we as leadership, we're going to try and, give them the tools to make the correct decisions, give them the authority to stop work if it's unsafe. But at the end of the day, there's all these additional factors that influence people's behavior. Now, we had a podcast, we talked about influencing behavior. Go back and listen to that one if you want to hear more on that. But, I often think about why do we pay people? What do we pay people for? And it's to get the job done. And so when we think back to they made a mistake, often it's in the context of they're trying to do the right thing in their mind, which is get the job done. So we don't want to stop.
I love that. Yeah, and it also goes back to what we measure. You can point to organizational influences that may have contributed to the decision-making process, and we do this all the time. We look at we come by it honestly. It's not like it's overt, right? We're not out there yelling at people to go faster, but
sometimes they are.
In those bad organizations. So let's say we put these mechanisms in place. We go through training. We give them andons. We have them in place where we empower workers to stop work and report things, or we do all of that. It's written. We communicate it, and we have we're saying the right things, right? But then you go and look, and at the end of at the door, the big door where the truck goes or where the parts go out or whatever, there's this giant screen with a timer or something, like, and it's like, you're right. It's like that that's what it's about at the end of the day, whether we like it or not. And I tell safety folks all the time, I wrote that, that book, Rethinking Safety Culture. It's like, unless we're making safety, putting it in a bottle and selling it to people, that safety is how we're going to get it done. It facilitates us being able to do it efficiently and with increased quality. I mean, because if you have incidents, you have a bunch of other things downstream that fall apart. But safety isn't why we're here. We make widgets. That's why we're here. We sell widgets. It could be the best widget. It could be the highest quality widget. It could be the most affordable. I mean, it's a widget, you know, you're going to use it and you're going to get another one, but you're not going to break the bank when you get our widget, you know, or whatever it is. That's why we exist. And so I think you're right. It's okay to acknowledge this reality of the vast, and this is also a hot principle, and it's true. The vast majority of people that come to work, even the ones that just want to clock in, do what they do and go home, they just want to do a good job and come back tomorrow and do it again.
Yep.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think
an interesting way to look at when somebody makes a mistake and how and why that happened versus what did you do? Yeah. How could this mistake have happened?
Now, and from our side, someone making a mistake, that's the start of an investigation for us. Mm-hmm. You know, to our side, the way we do our process, identify the what happened, look for those causal factors that led to the incident. And then once we have those, we can then go through, for us, it's go through the TapRooT tree to find missing best practices that will prevent that problem. So again, we give a series of questions to help people with that. But we go find those missing best practices that they can apply to strengthen their system, close that gap, and fix that problem. And so I think you've got to find where the mistakes occurred. You just have to make sure that the goal is not to blame the person when they made a mistake, but to understand the context behind it.
And I think you're right. The blame usually comes in when we stop at that versus continuing, go, hey, let's figure this out. Let's figure out how we can error proof that. And I use your phrase all the time, make it something easy to do right, hard to do wrong.
Yep.
Pretty basic. All right. One last question from me that I have, and then I'll let you follow up with anything that you've got over there. And I've got this one written down. How do you ensure the effectiveness of your RCA, your solutions? I get that a lot. It's like, how do we know? And we can say, oh, you follow DMAIC or follow, like, how do we know we're fixing the right thing? This is a common question I get.
So I won't give everything away, but I'll tell you what we do. We do 4 things. We do 4 things in our side to help us do this. 1, we've got the root causes that we have on our tree. We have something we call the corrective action helper. It's probably over my shoulder here, but I don't see it. We've got the corrective action helper there, which helps people write specific corrective actions to close specific gaps in their system, right? So every mistake that's out there has these best practices we could apply. We give you how to think about applying those best practices. That's what the helper is for. So that's one thing. 2, we look at something we call the safeguard hierarchy. Most of your people will probably be familiar with the hierarchy of controls.
Yes.
Ours is similar to that, except for it looks more at the human performance element of what safeguards are most effective and which ones are least effective. Spoiler alert, the safeguards that rely on humans are the least effective. So we talk about those and making sure that we're thinking about how can we be higher up on the hierarchy of safeguards and how do we write stronger corrective actions. We also
like moving or relocating the target or removing the target or safeguarding the target and then go down. Okay.
So if we can eliminate the hazard, that'd be the most effective thing. I actually have a new tool that I made recently. It's a safeguard wheel. It's kind of based. Have you seen the energy wheel?
Yes, I love the energy wheel. Yeah.
So I took the concept of the energy wheel and applied it to safeguards and have basically it's a process for looking all the way at the top of those hierarchy. What can I do from a safeguarding standpoint? Elimination, substitution, but also things like safeguards that prevent, safeguards that detect and stop, safeguards that contain. So I've got a little wheel thing that I've made. It's still in a work in progress, but it's a fun process. But the purpose of that is to help with the third concept, which is defense in depth. I'm sure you're familiar with the Swiss cheese model.
Yeah, I think most of us have heard about it or read about it.
And people complain about the Swiss cheese model because they say, oh, it's not stagnant. Those cheeses don't stay still and those holes don't stay the same size, which is true. But the idea is, with root cause analysis, the goal is to find those holes and shrink them. And so we can, when we write specific corrective actions, we shrink that hole. But what we also want to think about is, how do I add additional layers of cheese in there? How do I add that defense in depth in our process? So we teach some concepts behind defense in depth. And then lastly, we teach a process called SMARTER. I'm sure you've heard of SMART corrective actions. We teach SMARTER. One of the E's and the R in that, and that was Mark created that. But one of the E in that SMARTER is effective. And so a lot of times people will create corrective actions, they will put them in place and forget about them. Yeah. And I bet this is actually, it comes from the Shingo Prize Institute. They did a study on people that would submit to them for they had an award that they would give. And so you'd have to submit and you'd have to show data over years, and they kept track of you after that as well. And what they found was after 5 years, 85% of organizations either stayed stagnant, and that was only like 5% stayed stagnant, 80% regressed back to whatever they were doing performance-wise. And that holds true whether it's organization change or if it's corrective actions. So if you go look at corrective actions you put in place 5 years ago, how many of them are still in place, working as intended, or actually effective? And so that's a scary thing to think about. There's all this work that you've done over 5 years and how much of it's still in place. But if you go back and look, you'll see a lot of it fails. And the ones that fail typically are ones that don't have something embedded in the organization. It didn't become a part of our standard process. It didn't become something that we audit and manage to. Again, referencing back to something that we've done a previous talk on, looking at what a leadership takes to actually make things work.
Right.
But we didn't audit it anymore. We didn't measure effectiveness in the long run. If you don't put those in place, corrective actions tend to wither on the vine over time.
And this is why soapbox time. Fun fact, I just always keep my soapbox right under my desk. This is why I'm going to tell people not to do that again at the next stand-up. I think I'm improving on correcting that one person. Alex made this mistake, or Alex shouldn't have done X. So I'm going to tell Alex, but I'm going to actually write another corrective action that's going to feel like it's more systemic. And I'm going to tell everybody else at the next stand-up meeting or shift change meeting, don't do what Alex did. And then it's like, well, okay, that was 1 3-minute finger wagging point in time. And how long, let's say you have you're lucky enough to have a 10% attrition rate or churn, or 30% for some orgs. How long before nobody remembers not to do that because everybody's turned over or everybody's promoted and left? Like, that is not sustainable. That is not effective, right? So I love that.
I call it counseling the operator to be more careful. That's what they did. We counseled the operator to be more careful. Oh, great, wonderful. That's not going to work.
No, right? It's not. Yeah. Because that person if that person did it, like, they represent, by and large, most humans, right? Most workers, especially, let alone humans. If we just want to scale it down to just workers, they represent the average worker. So if that could have happened to them, we got a bigger problem.
Yep. You'll never counsel your way out of human error. It's not going to happen. People, that's why they're at the bottom of the safeguard hierarchy, because people are going to make mistakes. And if you're relying on people to catch their own mistakes, you're going to be set up for failure. We talk about in our human error course that I teach, coming up in Houston, Texas. Shameless plug.
No, plug away, because you do these stopping human error courses, and it's a very specific course. Yep. It's not like your TapRooT 5-day.
It's to think about the way people make mistakes. I think it's in November, if I'm not mistaken, in Houston. You go check it on our website. But in that course, we talk about how likely are people to catch their own mistake. What's the actual data and research say? And what it says is, at best, you're going to catch 60% of your own mistakes. And that is when you're told there are mistakes there.
That is when you're consciously actively trying to find.
When the researchers told you there's going to be problems, you've got to find them, right? When you know there are mistakes, then you can catch them 60% of the time. That means you're missing a third when you know it. When you don't know it, it's closer to 30, 20%. When it's an emergency, it's closer to 0. So where are we operating in? Are we operating in the I know I've made a mistake category, or are we operating in the emergency to routine? That's down in we're talking less than a third at that point.
Wow, we could even create, just me brainstorming, some sort of these 3 categories, kind of label them, brand them a little bit, and say, and to help us understand at what points of our process throughout the day, throughout the week, are we operating in either of these 3 categories. When you hear, you were in manufacturing, hot work, hot orders, right? We call them not hot work, but hot orders. We have a hot order. Expedited. Like, okay, well, that's moving the needle probably to the emergency. Like, it's like, we got to drop everything and go. Your error rate goes up. Overtime, because you got fatigue and stress, which is one of the questions we ask, human factors question. Were they under stress, fatigued, distracted? That moves the needle a little bit too when we put people into overtime mode. Increase volume, we increase the workload. They're operating under normal conditions, normal work shift, but we increased the workload, or sped up the rate for some period of time. Which I bet you we could quiz people and go like, when are you operating truly in this first category of the catching?
So you don't have to create your own. Rasmussen already did. He's got a hierarchy. He has knowledge-based, procedural, and routine.
Right. Routine, yeah, gotcha.
But that idea is, when you're in that knowledge-based, I'm dealing with uncertainty. I'm dealing with error. When you're in procedural, it's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. When I'm in routine, it's push button and it works. Yeah. So where you're at in those, as you get more complex, as complexity increases, human error skyrockets.
You can look at your processes or look at your work and go, what aspects of the work require just somebody constantly making decisions.
Where are they troubleshooting at? Where are they following procedures at? And where are they just doing task-based, simple, put this in there, close this, tape it, right? They're not doing something that requires a checklist. They're doing routine. So
non-thinking task.
Yep, routine work, basically procedural work, and I'd say troubleshooting, but it's really knowledge-based work. You put those 3, you can see knowledge-based, you're going to have a higher human error rate when you're doing those.
And that gets us to a question that just popped into my mind that folks do ask, and I didn't write it down. And it's a good place to wrap too. And that is, how can I predict, is there a way for us to foresee the future? And these are things you can look at. Where do we have?
You got to have AI.
Knowledge. Right, yeah. where do we have these knowledge-based tasks, and where and when? You could look at these categories and go, wow, we have a lot of our stuff is very we're relying on them to just know how to do this stuff and figure it out. We haven't mechanized or proceduralized or automated where we can. Is that one aspect of foreseeing where mistakes are likely? Yeah.
So, and this is sort of part of an intro to what we do in our human error course, Topic Human Error course. But you've got reactive. Basically, what we've covered today is talking about reactive analysis, right?
Yeah.
Somebody got hurt, we're going to react. If you want to look at proactive, which is how do you prevent errors, then you need to start at what are the human performance best practices that I can put in place today? How do I keep those systems operating as effective as they can? And what changes can I make in the system that are going to improve human performance and not reduce human performance? So that's kind of what we cover in that course, and we do 2 days on it.
Nice.
What I would recommend, and one thing that I can recommend to people is, if you want to be proactive, you need to be taking a look at how can you implement practices and look for gaps in your system early and implement best practices, right? Root cause analysis, looking for missing best practices. How can I identify those areas early and put those best practices in place before someone gets hurt? So
yeah, and I do believe, and I'll harken back to yet another episode that we had that we've talked about this. That is where we often fall short of making best use of our audits and inspections. We're out on the floor where the work happens, and we approach it as a compliance checklist. Like, I just have to check that I went over here and saw this thing. Well, you know what else is over there when you're looking at that thing? 3 workers that are working with tools or materials, and you can go, hey, ask them a question, right? So how can we make better use of our time out on the floor, but also our audits and inspections? Add another question or two, like, to look at those things you just talked about. Where could we improve?
Demonstrate. Again, I'll reference back. They can when they get this one done in a second, they can head over and listen to the one on conservative decision making. And I think we have a leadership one, normalization of excellence. Maybe, I don't remember.
Normalization of deviation.
Normalization of deviation. That's the one they need to go listen to. And that one will tell you. It's about demonstrating what you care for. That's the purpose of an audit. It's not just compliance, but what do you actually care for, and how do you demonstrate that? So go check out that podcast episode. I know we had a good time filming it, so I would highly recommend it.
We did. It was fun. We always have a good time. And hey, I appreciate your time this morning as well on this topic. I thought covering some FAQs, kind of laying the groundwork for, okay, if you're asking these types of questions, you either don't have a process in place, or a good one anyway, or you don't understand why we need a good process in place for this. So hopefully we've given some folks some things to think about. Certainly our safety pros in the audience may get a lot of these, and maybe they themselves don't understand how they should answer these questions and what these questions actually mean. It isn't just they give them an answer. This should be telling us, ooh, there's an opportunity here, I think, for us to do something.
And if any of your listeners want to learn more about TapRooT, they can come to one of our public courses. They can reach out to me or come see us. I'll be in Tulsa, Oklahoma later this month, and at the end of July, I'll be in Amsterdam after that. And for those that really want to travel,
right.
But again, that's in September. So
you never know. We may be big in Amsterdam. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah. Who knows what your metric is? But hey, if there's somebody that wants to come to our training, come check out our public course schedule. You go find our information on TapRooT, taproot.com. So,
and I know we've had many podcast listeners go through your program, various programs.
I've met them in courses.
In courses, right? And we're already planning for the next global summit. TapRooT Global Summit is also an opportunity to immerse yourself or introduce yourself to the wonderful world of not just TapRooT, but root cause analysis. I do believe, as a safety professional, this is something that we need to we need to become not just SMEs and subject matter experts, but dare I say, evangelize. There's a 90s, early 2000s term. We definitely need to nail this aspect of what we do, and I guess maybe fit into that facilitator role. We need to make sure we get this part right. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat the same old mistakes, organizational mistakes that we've been making that unfortunately result in people being injured. And that's not okay.
What's doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results?
I think it's insanity. I could be wrong. I think it's insanity. Nice. All right, Alex, thanks so much. Again, taproot.com is where they can go for more information.
Yep.
All right. Thanks again. And I look forward to our next episode. We always seem to find some really cool stuff to talk about. So thanks again.